Calories in, calories out. Is that all there really is to fat loss? Nope. It's a lot more nuanced than that, and it's important to know if you're wanting to lose weight. If you've had trouble dropping pounds, you need to watch this video because we will drop the 50 biggest facts that no one tells you about losing weight. Be sure to stick around for the most important things you need to know. Speaking of dropping weight and dropping fat, that's a good place to start. The first thing that has gotten lost in translation is that fat is a good thing. We often talk about fat as if it's bad. In reality, you would die without it. Our bodies store fat to keep us alive during periods of no to little food. Unfortunately, we have taken advantage of this adaptation and have caused it to be harmful to our health. How harmful? We're going to get into that later in the video, but it's not good. As we're talking about burning fat, do you actually know what happens to the fat when you lose it? Everyone talks about losing fat, but no one tells you where it goes. That takes our number 2 spot. This is going to be a real fast explanation. When needed, fat is released as triglycerides, which are broken into compounds known as glycerol and fatty acids. These fatty acids then go through several reactions to create energy in the form of a compound known as ATP. From these reactions come 2 waste products, carbon dioxide and water. Your body then expels these through breathing, sweating, and urine, so you breathe out fat. Again, that's the simplified version. For number 3, let's look at some more confusion. Losing weight and losing fat are not the same thing. Did you know that the average poop can weigh up to 1 pound? This means if you weigh yourself, then go poop and weigh yourself again, you're going to lose 1 pound. But that's not fat you lost, it's poop. At the same time, it's not uncommon for some people to lose fat but gain weight due to muscle. They ultimately look better but are upset because the scale says they weigh more. Know this, the scale is merely one tiny tool to use to track fat loss. There are a lot of things going on in your body, and the scale should be part of other measurements to get the full picture. For example, are your clothes looser or tighter? Do you have more energy? Are your lifts better? How do you look in the mirror? What are people saying? Do not become a slave to the scale. The best way to combat this is number 4. Nothing tells you how to properly weigh yourself. Always weigh yourself first thing in the morning, after you go to the bathroom, and before you eat or drink anything. This is the best way to get an accurate representation of how much fat you are actually losing. However, keep in mind there are still other factors to keep in mind as we just said. However, this will give you the most accurate true reading. So how do you lose fat? Well, one of the easiest ways to lose fat is to sleep. Number 5 is that more sleep promotes fat loss and preserves muscle mass. Through a variety of mechanisms, getting more sleep encourages more fat loss. For example, one study had a group of individuals get into a similar caloric deficit, but one group got 5.5 hours of sleep versus 8 hours of sleep. Both groups lost 6.6 pounds of weight, however, the composition of this weight varied greatly. The group which only had 5.5 hours of sleep saw a 55% lower decrease in fat mass loss, but 60% more muscle loss. If you really want to lose fat, get enough sleep. As you can see, sleep is an easy way to self-sabotage your progress. Want to know another way? The 6th thing you need to know about losing fat is you must count calories. Okay, we know there are some who say they lost weight without. We also know there are plenty of people who maintain weight without counting calories. However, we would bet that at some point in their life they did. We're not saying you will need to count calories your entire life, but when you first actually diet, you need to better understand how many calories are found in food. That's because of the 7th thing no one talks about. People are awful at estimating, like the worst. Various studies show that people can underestimate the amount of calories they eat by 2,000. That's more than half a pound of fat. If you do that every day for a week, you'll gain 3 pounds of fat. This variance can range significantly. Therefore, take the time and count calories at first. It's no fun, but neither is gaining 3 pounds of unwanted fat. While we're on the topic of being terrible at guessing, the 8th thing no one talks about is how bad we are at estimating our activity levels too. You may hear people using watches that say they burned 700 calories in a basic aerobic class. They didn't. It's probably more like 300, as people tend to overestimate by 50 to 70%. If you're also underestimating how many calories you're eating, it's no wonder your fat loss isn't working. Speaking of not working, let's talk about what does work. Diets, all of them. The 9th thing that no one talks about is that every diet works for losing fat so long as there are 2 variables. These variables are getting into a caloric deficit, and this, the most important, drum roll, adherence. You got to be able to follow a diet you can stick with if you want to lose weight. Long-term studies have shown this to be the case. There may be some difference in weight loss in the beginning months. For example, low-carb diets tend to encourage more weight loss faster. However, meaningful weight loss occurs in the long term, and in the long term, every diet works. This is why you must find a diet that fits your lifestyle. You might be taken back by hearing long term. How long is long term? For number 10, the thing no one talks about is that fat loss is a longer process than you think. Under normal conditions, it's suggested a person gets into a deficit of 300 to 500 calories. Now, in order to lose 1 pound of fat, you need to burn 3,500 calories. This means you should expect to lose anywhere from 0.6 to 1.0 pounds of fat a week or 2.5 to 4.0 pounds in a month. Now, this is much slower than most people are planning on. The reason it's so slow is to mitigate muscle loss or lower the metabolism, which can occur when the caloric deficit is too high. For those with a lot of weight to lose, you could bump this up to 1,000 calories. This would equate to 2 pounds a week or 8 pounds a month. This is a little faster, but keep in mind this is for people who are obese, so they have a lot to lose. However, be sure to watch to stick around to get the full picture. While we're talking about calories, let's look at number 11. People need to start telling you that calories are not just calories. The gist of "a calorie is a calorie" is well intended and a good place to start. However, this phrase is usually used to insinuate that it doesn't matter where you get calories from, as it will have the same effect. That's a very basic understanding. Different foods can affect the body differently, as well as providing other nutrients such as minerals and vitamins. So yes, a calorie is a calorie, but that doesn't mean the source won't be more or less beneficial for the body. Number 12 is a good example of this. It has to do with what's called the thermal effect of food, or TEF for short. When you eat a food, the body must spend energy to digest the food, transport the nutrients, and expel the waste. Simply put, TEF is the amount of calories it takes for your body to digest and use a certain food. Your 3 macros all have different TEF scores. Fat is about 1%, carbs are at about 10%, and protein is a whopping 20 to 30%. This means if you were to eat 100 calories of protein, you would burn 20 to 30 calories by way of TEF. As a result, if a person ate the same amount of calories, but one person ate a greater percentage of protein, the person that ate more protein would theoretically lose more weight, as they would burn more calories burned through the TEF of protein. Speaking of protein, let's look at number 13. When you are losing weight, no one tells you you actually want to increase the amount of protein you eat. This seems contradictory, as you also want to decrease your total calories. You do. Therefore, you increase your protein intake and then decrease your carb intake to compensate and hit your desired calories. Now, there are 3 good reasons for this. The first is the higher TEF we just mentioned. Secondly, the extra protein can help mitigate muscle loss. And 3, protein has the greatest satiety effect of all the macros. Protein is harder to digest, so it sticks around in your digestive tract longer, keeping you satisfied. That's also why it creates a higher TEF. For number 14, we're going all the way back to the beginning. Why do we even get fat? The irony is that storing fat is an evolutionary advantage, as it acts as stored energy during times of no or low food intake. The problem is that now food is available everywhere. Unfortunately, our bodies haven't adapted to this plethora of food, so it does what it's supposed to do. It stores calories for later. We then eat an hour later, so our body never has a chance to use the already stored fat, so we save more. So on and so on. That seems simple, but there are other things going on. The 15th thing people don't talk about is how psychology plays a major role in fat loss. There are those on the extreme other side who will tell everyone they need to just pull themselves up by the bootstraps and lose weight. To some extent, this is true, but for this to occur, the psychological component needs to be addressed first. This can range from emotional eating, eating late at night, or depression. Our minds play a large factor on what we eat. Luckily, there are several organizations out there which are taking this aspect of dieting seriously. If you know what to do and what not to do but keep doing it, you may want to look at one of the organizations. Okay, let's get 16 out of the way because you're not going to like it. Nothing good comes from drinking alcohol if losing weight is a priority. Yes, we know that you can just have a couple if you account for the calories. For one, alcohol has empty calories. And no, there is no such thing as a low-calorie alcohol drink, because the actual alcohol compound has calories. To be exact, 1 gram of alcohol has 7 calories. What this looks like in real life is that the cleanest, purest alcohol that people drink, vodka or clear rum, still has around 70 to 80 calories per shot. Still, alcohol also stimulates your AGRP neurons, which are your starvation neurons. In effect, it makes you feel extremely hungry, even if you just ate. You probably know this, so now you know why. What makes it worse is usually people gravitate towards oily and processed foods. If that's not enough, alcohol can disrupt your sleep. We already spoke about that earlier. So we're not saying you can't drink, just understand the risk. Now for something positive. For number 17, you actually can perform a proper body recomposition. By this we mean you can lose fat and gain muscle at the same time. And we're not talking about new lifters. Experienced lifters have been shown to lose weight while putting on muscle mass, and we've already spoken about the secret: protein. Every study that has demonstrated a proper body recomposition has used high protein intake above 1 gram per kilogram of body weight. At the same time, you need to be in a minimal caloric deficit. No more 200 to 300 calories, and get plenty of sleep. Now, the muscle gain and fat loss will not be as dramatic as doing one at a time, but it can save you the trouble of needing to bulk and cut. Now the research is still lacking to give you an exact protocol, but know that it's not impossible. Another fat loss myth that needs to be revisited, number 18, is that you can perform spot reduction. Well, maybe. Now there's still a lot of nuance that's involved with this, but we still want to mention it, as there does seem to be some possibility. In fact, there are 2 studies that have shown this to be possible, but there are some caveats. The main one being that it seems to occur primarily in the stomach area. What both studies did was use endurance training with abdominal exercises, for example, cycling for 5 minutes, then performing sit-ups for 1 minute and repeating this cycle for a length of time. The theory of how this works has 2 mechanisms, the first being that it depletes the glycogen levels of the muscles. This forces the body to draw from fat stores near the working muscle. And second, the ab exercises create more heat in the stomach area, which makes it easier for the fat in that area to be used for energy. So next time your fat expert says you can't, you can now be the "well, actually" guy. While we're on exercises, we should also clear up another myth. Number 19 is that there are no fat-burning exercises. By this we mean that there is no specific set of exercises that you should use to burn more fat. All exercises work by increasing caloric burn, and that's it. Walking on a treadmill, pushing a sled, a circuit set, all of them will require energy and will also burn fat. Choose what fits your goals best. Okay, number 20 isn't a huge deal, but we gotta get it off our chest. You've probably heard people talk about Tabata a lot in terms of weight loss, but probably have never heard the truth. Tabata is not for fat loss. Also, Tabata is the surname of a Japanese sports researcher who invented the protocol and is still alive today. In fact, some of his more recent papers noted how most people doing Tabata aren't actually doing Tabata due to their misunderstanding of what it is. The primary purpose of Tabata is to increase VO2 max in a minimum amount of time. It's only 4 minutes long, so how many calories do you think you can actually burn? If you're going to use Tabata for fat loss, pick one exercise you can perform at high intensity. Cycling is ideal, but things like mountain climbers and burpees could also work. Since we just talked about Tabata, it made us think of HIIT. Number 21 is that HIIT is no more effective at helping you lose weight than steady-state cardio. Both are awesome, and everyone should have at least one session of each in their training program weekly. People need to stop pitting training regimes against each other as if it's one or the other. This brings us to number 22. We wish experts would start promoting simple cardio to new trainees. Many people wanting to lose weight are out of shape. However, they try to go perform high-intensity exercise, and they simply don't have the fitness levels to benefit from the training. They either gas out early or get hurt. Rather, jumping on an incline treadmill for an hour is low impact and will burn a ton of calories, while also giving the lower body muscles a nice little burn. Burning calories does not need to be complicated. For number 23, let's stick with errors found in the gym when people are losing weight. This is a big one and might blow your mind. Too many people put way too much emphasis on burning calories in the gym. Well, you absolutely should use the gym for fat loss, but the primary goal shouldn't be to burn calories. We'll explain what you should do for number 24. Figure this: how often does the average person go to the gym? 3 to 5 times a week? For about an hour? Hour and a half? At max, that's only 7.5 hours max for the whole week. If this is what you're relying on for your fat loss, you are going to be hurting. Rather, you need to pay attention to how active you are outside the gym. This is known as NEAT, or non-exercise aerobic thermogenesis. It's any type of activity that's not specifically for training. This is where the idea of daily 10,000 steps comes in. Take your dog for a walk, ride a bike to the gym, stroll on the beach or around the house for an hour after dinner. This is highly effective and may be the secret to weight loss if there is one. Increase daily activity and watch your calories. Done. So let's explain what you should do in the gym. Number 25 is that the gym has 2 functions: increase muscle mass or maintain muscle mass. You can run around and burn calories anywhere, but where else are you able to apply a significant stimulus to the muscles? Nowhere. We understand the desire to do things like circuits and other fat-burning type training, and that's fine. However, you should train each muscle group with at least one primary compound exercise with a heavy enough weight to mitigate muscle loss. If not, you are forfeiting this benefit. You can burn calories with your NEAT and control calories with your diet. It's a trifecta of weight loss. Now, you're probably thinking that you want to keep your muscle because it burns so many more calories than fat, yeah? Increase your metabolism? Well, number 26 is that muscle isn't going to result in a ton of extra calories burned, as some would have you believe. The number 50 seems to be thrown around some, suggesting 1 pound of muscle burns 50 calories a day. That's just insane. In reality, the number is closer to 4.5 to 7 calories. It's not that much. Now, this does not mean you should just lose your muscle. Absolutely not. You still want to keep your muscle because it makes you stronger and improves your physique. Plus, you worked for it. Further, having more muscle mass as you age will mitigate issues with sarcopenia, the natural wasting of muscle. Therefore, during your weight loss journey, lift weights with the intent of keeping all your muscle. Speaking of aging, number 27 may rub some of you the wrong way. Our metabolism only slows as we age because we become lazy. Ouch! That hurts to say, which is why no one says it. But it's important to know the truth to fix the problem, but people don't say it. This claim is often used by adults in a nonchalant manner to explain why they have gained weight. Oh, so it's not because you stopped working out and started eating fast food every day? Now, it is true that metabolism does tend to drop in adults after 30, but it's not because of biology. Like we just said, it drops due to inactivity and poor diet. The reality is that our metabolism shouldn't really slow until about 60 years old. For number 28, we really wish people would tell you that there aren't any special tricks to lose fat. In fact, many will tell you there are. Drinking vinegar before sleep, always eating carbs with protein, or taking cold showers. Maybe there are some minor health benefits to these, but they're not melting fat off your body. All the majority of people need to do is stop eating processed foods, stop eating fast food, and stop eating or drinking food with added sugar. In fact, a good portion just needs to stop eating candy, snacks, and drinking cola. Seriously, doing that would do absolute wonders for a good portion of people. Cut those foods out and see what happens. But what can make you fat? Well, it seems to depend on what decade you were born. Number 29 is society is always going through cycles of scare tactics concerning fat loss. In the 90s, it was fat that made you fat. In 2010, it was any food made in the past century with the paleo diet. Now it's any carb. Any and all carbs make you fat. If you stopped eating every food that had ever been part of these scare tactics, you would starve to death. The point is, don't let scare tactics control your diet. Ironically, the only food that has never really seen these types of health scare campaigns is fast food. The only food that deserves it. 2 words: sensibility and moderation. However, for this to work, we need to acknowledge number 30, which is that we need to consider the personal behavior of people and not just studies. What happens in the lab doesn't necessarily happen in real life. For example, sure, maybe eating after a certain time doesn't really matter in terms of fat loss while in a research setting. However, in real life, setting a time which someone can't eat after could have huge effects. Maybe they tend to eat a lot of junk food in the evening, and not eating at night prevents this. Therefore, we need to respect the experiences of individuals. If someone finds something works for them, then cool. No need to tell them they're wrong. At the same time, if something works for you, don't force it on everyone else. Actually, there is one group of people who need to tell others what to do. For 31, one thing people don't talk about when it comes to fat loss is the parent's role. Parents need to realize the massive effect they can have on the eating behaviors of their children. Children who come from a home with obese parents who practice poor eating habits are significantly more likely to also develop poor eating habits and become obese. This then becomes a perpetual cycle and continues until someone, maybe you, breaks the cycle. On the other hand, if you teach your child good eating habits, there's a good chance they'll never have to worry about losing fat to a significant degree. Speaking of children, there is another very important fact we must talk about. For 32, we need to talk about the rise in childhood obesity. It keeps rising and rising every year. Today, it's estimated that about 1 out of every 5 children are obese. And to be clear, this is obese, not overweight. In the 1930s, the rate of obesity in male children was 0% and just 2% in girls. It was barely even a thing. We need to work together to bring it back down to these levels, but it will only happen if we change our behavior. And what about the adults? Not much better. In fact, it's a lot worse. For number 33, we wish people would talk about the prevalence of obesity in adults as well. It's about 41%. Again, that's obesity. This number continues to rise and rise and rise every year. What's ironic is it keeps rising even though we have more education, weight loss tools, pills, creams, you name it. Obviously, these things don't work, even though people are trying. We'll find out how dangerous this is later. But one of the reasons for this is because people keep worrying about things that don't matter. Number 34 is you need to stop majoring in the minors. What this means is stop looking for various biohacks or putting all of your effort into staying away from certain foods or trying to increase your BMR or a special diet or whatever it is. These all have a minuscule effect, if any at all. There is no secret or trick or fast way to do it. You've heard this said in other ways, but keep your fat loss strategy simple. If you're wondering what BMR is, it stands for basal metabolic rate, and is the main subject of number 35, it doesn't increase that much. So this one has some nuance, so pay attention. BMR is the amount of calories your body burns at rest and accounts for 60 to 70% of your total calories burned. Many people try to use all these hacks to increase their BMR, but these hacks actually have a small effect. In addition, many of the things you do to increase BMR are things you should be doing anyways, like lifting weights, eating healthy foods, staying away from alcohol, getting good sleep, etc. You should definitely be doing these anyways. What you don't need to worry about is taking cold showers or eating peppers. You can if you love it, but these little hacks have minimal effects on your total BMR. Again, increase your activity and watch your nutrition. The reason this is so important is in our number 36, you can't out-train or out-biohack a poor diet. Sure, maybe you took a really cold shower and trained 2 hours every single day. You can still gain weight by eating too much. However, if you do none of that but eat less calories than you need, you will still lose weight. Do you see what we're saying? Your diet is what controls your weight gain or weight loss and is where your attention should be. Always. However, while you should focus on your diet, we need to talk about fasting. Number 37 is that intermittent fasting doesn't work. Or maybe it does. Intermittent fasting doesn't work for some people, but it does work for others. It's just not a miracle. Disclaimer: this is not addressing other health benefits, as that's outside the scope of this video. With that said, there is no miracle mechanism of fasting that somehow causes you to burn more calories. The primary mechanism by which fasting helps burn fat is it controls the amount of calories a person eats. If you usually snack from the time you wake up until you go to bed, and then only give yourself 4 or 6 hours to eat, you're probably going to eat less. However, some people manage to still eat a ton of junk food and still reach a caloric surplus, or they cheat. Therefore, it may or may not work for you, but the primary mechanism is simply calorie control. Saying that fasting works is essentially saying eating less works. Yes, it does, so if fasting helps you eat less, then awesome. We now want to share with you a hack that actually does work. Number 38 is that many people will eat healthy naturally from working out. Have you ever noticed that when you work out, you naturally eat better? This is a real phenomenon that occurs due to alterations in the way your brain works. Working out causes changes to occur and improves your executive function. Executive function is the part of the brain that helps you make good choices. So oftentimes, if a person simply starts to work out, they will naturally clean up their diet. This doesn't mean you don't need to watch your diet, but it shows that weight loss occurs optimally through multiple mechanisms and will probably be easier. Speaking of all the different mechanisms that affect fat loss, let them occur slowly. Number 39 is to stop trying to fix everything right away. There are probably a lot of things you need to change in your life to optimize your fitness levels and fat loss. Too often, people try to change everything on day one. As a result, they become overwhelmed and hate life and quit. The phrase 1% better every day has never been more true than with fat loss. Make small changes daily or weekly to help you build good habits without becoming overwhelmed. This ultimately brings us to number 40. Fat loss is a lifetime process. So many people are mainly interested in quick fixes. While these can work, they must be accompanied with actual changes in behavior. That's because the awful truth is it doesn't matter how much weight you lose, because you can gain it back easily once you revert back to your old ways. That's why we say there are no shortcuts. Once you lose weight, you must then continue doing what you're doing. For how long? Well, however long you want to keep the weight off. And while we're talking about how fat loss takes a lot of dedication, we need to mention number 41. Thermogenic pills don't make much difference either. There may be some benefits from them, but it's when they're used in conjunction with diet and exercise. Even then, the effect is still small. As you can see, this falls in line with the whole gist of this video. Stop searching for secrets and shortcuts. Another thing that doesn't work, number 42, is that low-fat foods are largely sales tactics. Now, this isn't true for all of them, it is for a lot. Low-fat foods largely rely on our fear of fat. Therefore, they remove the fat but often add other ingredients to make up for the loss of flavor. This may either be artificial ingredients, added sugar, or extra sodium. Your best bet is to eat whole foods and not rely on these options. Not that you can't use them, just don't fool yourself into believing there is always a healthier option. Regardless, the easiest way to lose fat is to not get fat in the first place. Number 43 is that fat cells never go away. When you initially gain weight, you will develop new fat cells in the process. The primary job of these is to hold on to lipids. When you lose weight, these cells release the lipids and become smaller. However, they don't go away. Well, they can go away, but it requires liposuction or another similar process. This is one of the reasons why it's believed people gain weight back so easily after they lose weight. Unfortunately, there's not a lot you can do about this, but keep it in mind, especially if you have children. Mitigating the creation of these cells to begin with will make it much easier for them to maintain a healthy body weight. Another thing that doesn't help with weight loss: artificial sweeteners. Number 44 is that artificial sweeteners may actually increase your fat gain. Many people will use artificial sweeteners as a healthier option in an attempt to cut out calories. However, this doesn't seem to be a foolproof plan. A large meta-analysis determined that evidence from RCTs does not clearly support the intended benefits of non-nutritive sweeteners for weight management. In contrast, observational data suggests that routine consumption of non-nutritive sweeteners may be associated with a long-term increase in BMI and elevated risk of cardiometabolic disease. When looking at all the different studies, there is no consistent relationship between using artificial sweeteners and weight loss, and can even cause weight gain. There's a few theories why. One is that it can actually cause you to be hungrier and eat more. Other less medical-specific causes is it's suggested that many people that use artificial sweeteners simply use it without making any other changes in their life. They rely on this for their weight loss. Regardless of why, these are not the Holy Grail. Speaking of Holy Grails, as of today, number 45 is there are no Holy Grails. Why? Because it's an ongoing task. Your weight maintenance is just as important as fat loss. Lately, Ozempic has been making the rounds and does show promise. However, what researchers have noted is that many people who lose weight with Ozempic gain it right back after use. Now, this doesn't mean Ozempic doesn't work. It means that unless you change your habits, you will never keep your weight off even if you do lose it. We can apply this to anything. This is why learning sustainable habits is a must. But there is good news. Number 46 is that everyone can lose weight. Some people will say that they've been dieting but haven't lost any weight. They will then conclude that they can't lose weight. The reality is that there are very few people who can't lose weight. What's more likely is you're messing up somewhere. Maybe you are missing some calories when counting them, or maybe your activity levels are lower than you think. If you're not losing weight, don't just throw your hands up. Go back to the drawing board and try to find what is going wrong. Let's look at food for a bit again. Number 47 is that you can get fat, from carbs, or from protein. You will become fat regardless of these if you get into a caloric surplus. This alone shows you why low fat doesn't make a difference if you just replace it with carbs. The only one that can make any type of difference is protein, but excess amino acids can still be converted into fat. Essentially, this is just another way to tell you that you need to control calories. We also need to make one thing clear about fat. Number 48 is that there are two types of fat held on the body, known as adipose tissue, visceral and subcutaneous. Visceral tissue is adipose tissue that's held around your organs, while subcutaneous tissue is the tissue under your skin. Now, both can be bad and detrimental to your health. However, visceral fat brings about serious issues and is more often associated with things like diabetes, cancer, and hypertension. Unfortunately, researchers still don't have a solid way to target one over the other. Now let's talk about some more confusion with nomenclature. The 49th thing that people fail to tell you is that burning fat is not the same as losing fat. This exercise is going to burn fat right off your body. We hope so. That's literally one of the main functions of fat. The body is always burning fat for fuel, as it's the body's stored source of energy. However, this doesn't necessarily convert into actually losing fat. People will hear that fasted training increases fat burned and automatically assume this means fat loss. It doesn't. Quick thought experiment. Let's say that you eat a bowl of oatmeal and then go for an hour-long cardio session. Your body will utilize those carbs for fuel. Now let's say you do your cardio for an hour fasted. Now your body will be forced to burn fat for fuel. However, when you get home, you then eat the same amount of oatmeal. Now your body won't use the carbs and they'll be stored as glycogen or turned into fat. See what we mean? Remember in the beginning of the video we talked about how long weight loss takes? Well, number 50 is that while you should lose weight slower than you thought, it shouldn't be too slow. Several studies have shown that faster weight loss in the beginning can lead to greater overall weight loss without a greater chance of regaining it back. So, what's fast? In this study, women who lost 1.5 pounds of fat per week saw greater overall fat loss. As you can see, this would equate to a deficit of 750 calories and isn't terribly faster than the suggested 1 pound per week. We reached number 50, but make sure to stick around for 2 bonus ones. Now, many people say that education is part of the reason obesity is such a major problem. However, more people need to tell you that we learned the most important nutrition information in elementary school. Eat whole foods, make your plate colorful, eat plenty of fruits and veggies, and who remembers the pictures of chicken and fish for protein? Bam! That's what you need to do. Today, people insist on making losing fat so complicated. We need to get back to a time where fat loss is simple again. For the first bonus one, we need to get serious. We all know that obesity is bad for our health, but not enough people are talking about is that after age, weight was the #1 predictor of outcome during the COVID-19 pandemic. That is, young people who were of normal weight had a very low risk of severe outcome. On the other hand, the more overweight a person was, it resulted in a worse outcome. This included greater risk of infection, hospitalization, clinically severe disease, mechanical ventilation, ICU admission, and even death. But COVID isn't the only health risk. In fact, for the second bonus one, we're going to end with the most important thing people aren't talking about enough. The most important reason you lose fat is not for aesthetics. Looking good is cool, but it is not the most important reason why we need to take fat loss seriously. The most important reason is for our health. As a society, we must take fat loss seriously, as obesity is the #1 preventable factor of death and disease in the world. Diabetes, cancer, heart tension, stroke, all of these can be largely reduced simply by losing fat. Even if you don't care about having a six-pack, you need to start taking fat loss seriously.